Hello. Please do keep eating, keep coming in. There are some seats at the front here if you're looking for any. Great. Just to introduce myself, my name is Sunny, and I want to say a very, very warm welcome to Big Questions. Big Questions. If this is your first time coming here, thank you so much for coming along. I really hope that you find this lunchtime interesting and useful for your own thinking. We do pretty much what it sounds like. We want to ask the big questions about life, about meaning, about Christianity, and today we're going to be looking at whether belief in God is anti-intellectual. So to help us think more about this, I'll be inviting Niv Lobo up in a couple of moments to give us a short talk. There'll be time for discussion around tables and then questions to Niv. So do be thinking of any questions you have. There's a number on the feedback forms which you can text in, or else there'll be time for questions from the floor. So Niv is a former student of Cambridge. He studied English at Clare College, and now he works with students around universities and does talks like these. So without further ado, Niv Lobo.
Hi. Your applause is quite unnecessary. I haven't said anything yet, but it's really nice to see you all here. I remember 4 years ago being here as a student in your position. I didn't have a beard then, but I remember enjoying it, so I hope you enjoy it too. And it's really great that you're here. Up on the screen, we have a number, a mobile phone number. So if questions come to you while I'm speaking, do ping them away to that number, and that'll be something we can talk through later. Now, I want to begin by saying something all of us might be able to agree with, and it's this. Christopher Hitchens had style. The man really knew how to make his arguments in a pungent, pointed manner. And here's how he begins his chapter on the metaphysical claims of religion. It might be a bit small to read, but he has these telling epigraphs before he even says anything. I am a man of one book, Thomas Aquinas. We sacrifice the intellect to God, Ignatius of Loyola, and so on. It's very savvy. Christopher Hitchens enlists the voices of religious faith to make his case for him. Belief in God must be anti-intellectual. Here are some believers in God saying so. And think of the dichotomies that get presented. Reason versus faith. Which do you choose? Well, who wants to be irrational? Understanding our world and exploring it versus short-circuiting all of that and crying, God did it. Who would choose that? Especially here, at Cambridge, where intellect is a crowning glory. Who'd go against the grain? Now, obviously, I'm going to. That's why I'm here. I want to make the case that belief in God is not anti-intellectual. And I could do that by listing the myriad scholars and scientists and thinkers and philosophers whose Christian faith was at the heart of their intellectual endeavors. I could name Pascal and Bach and Faraday and Dostoevsky and go on and on and on. But if that's all I did, I don't think it would be very helpful to anyone. Because if that's all I did, you could still call it the ultimate cognitive dissonance. Yes, there are intellectual Christians out there. Some of them even get first at Cambridge. But in order to be that way, they have to suspend their blind faith in God. Believers in God might not be anti-intellectual, but their belief in God, some might say, is. Can I say, no Christian that I know would ever look at it that way. We would say that it's because of our belief in God, who he's shown himself to be, the way he's ordered reality, we believe. It's because of those things that we value the intellect. Now, as an English student, I never had to go to the Cavendish Laboratory. But if you do, either to the old one or the new one, the physics labs, you'll find an inscription there above the doorway. It's in Latin in the old one, English in the new one. I'll read out the English for you. It says, "The works of the Lord are great, sought out of all who have pleasure therein." That inscription is surprising in all kinds of ways. It's above a world-leading physics faculty, and it talks about God, the Lord. To an English student, it's surprising because it talks about science in terms of pleasure. It sees the scientific endeavor as a good thing as human beings get to grips with the world around them. And maybe most surprisingly of all, given our topic, it's from the Bible. It's Psalm 111, verse 2. Some may talk about the blind faith of religion, but that's not the approach the Bible takes, as this verse shows. The Christian believer has every reason to value intellect, because according to what they believe, They inhabit a world that can be investigated and understood. After all, serious and significant intellectual endeavor can only take place in a comprehensible world, a world that can be understood, and in which that understanding means something, has an objective bearing on reality. And the belief that there is a God who made and sustains all things is where that idea of a comprehensible world has its roots. That premise, believe it or not, has been and continues to be at the heart of much serious intellectual pursuit, and it has motivated and drawn out the very finest of our thinking. Blind faith, faith in the teeth of evidence, faith going against what's obviously there, is something a lot of people often attack. Well, please, let me join the queue to attack it. As a Christian, nothing about that concept is appealing to me. God invites nobody to ditch their intellect. Rather, he invites people to know him on the basis of the evidence he's given. For Christians, faith is trust in a personal God. It does mean acknowledging that we don't know everything there is to know, but it is founded on evidence. It is rational. Speaking personally, when I became a Christian, it was very much a process of investigating evidence, seeing where it pointed, examining a figure from history, Jesus of Nazareth, and the claims he made, becoming convinced on the basis of that evidence of the necessity of changing my mind. That is far from the whole story. You can ask me more about that later, but it is a substantial part of the story. Are there anti-intellectual believers in God? Yes, of course there are. The same way that there are anti-intellectual people who don't believe in God. But when we consider the rationale that Christian belief has produced, and when we think about how much of our finest intellectual exploration is indebted to that rationale, then really we'd have to say that belief in God can be pro-intellectual. That Christian belief values intellect. It is rational. But while the Christian faith is rational, it's not rationalistic. That is to say, it doesn't put reason on an all-transcending pedestal. The Christian faith doesn't make intellect ultimate. You are Cambridge students, and it does give me exceeding pleasure to tell you that the Christian faith values intellect. But it gives me much more pleasure to tell you this. Christian faith doesn't make intellect ultimate. That's not just my screwy personal take on it. I want to quote one of Jesus' most famous sayings, which we find in an eyewitness biographical account of his life that we call John's Gospel. It's a remarkable moment. It's often quoted, and you probably already know it. But Jesus is speaking to his disciples the night before he dies, and he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." It's a capacious statement. Jesus isn't just saying that he believes in absolute truth, though that is not uncontroversial to many people today. He's saying more. Jesus is saying that he is that truth. And Jesus is always doing that sort of thing. He in one encounter, meets a man called Nicodemus. Nicodemus answers to the title Teacher of Israel. He's a member of the Jewish ruling council. He's kind of a big deal. He has many leather-bound books, and his apartment smells of rich mahogany. He's a smart man. And yet the first thing Jesus does to him is tell him that he has to be born again. Tell this vastly intelligent man that he requires a whole new spiritual fresh start to begin to understand the things of God. On another occasion, Jesus is speaking to a crowd, and he tells them that he is the good shepherd, which makes, you don't need to go to Cambridge to work this one out, which makes his followers sheep. Embracing Jesus in faith will mean embracing our limitations and acknowledging the limitations of our reason, not making intellect ultimate. In other words, even if you are Nicodemus, a theological bigwig, even if you are a Cambridge undergraduate, even if you are a Cambridge lecturer, you must forfeit your rational supremacy. Your intellect cannot be ultimate, and when it comes to spiritual truth, it cannot take you where you want to go. Now, I've just made a lot of claims. Why accept that? These limitations seem so stark. Well, here's what happens after Jesus makes that famous statement. One of his followers, Philip, says, "Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us." And this is Jesus' reply. "Don't you know me, Philip, even after I've been among you such a long time? Anyone who's seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, 'Show us the Father'? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and that the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who's doing his work. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves." I take it all of us understand the limitations of perspective. I take it we all understand the need to hear from other people's perspective, different points of view, hearing from people who have something to offer because they come from a place that we don't. It's a rallying cry in the academy. We need to hear minority voices because what they have to say might challenge or enrich our conclusions, and we are poorer if we don't hear them. Now, if Jesus is who he says he is, and I know that's an if, a big one for a lot of us, then he does speak from a different perspective, a unique, a higher and authoritative perspective, a perspective from which to speak about ultimate things in an ultimate way, which, if true, and again I know it's an if, makes truth personal and makes apprehending truth more relational before it is cognitive. And while reason has its place, that place is not ultimate, because intellect can't take you as far as you'd want it to go. And we find the truth, finally, not through unaided bare reason, but the claim is we know it fully in a relationship with this person who is absolute truth, in knowing Jesus. That, by the way, is a unique claim. I know of no other religion or philosophy which puts it like Jesus does. And I'm convinced that this is one of the best things you will hear all term, one of the most liberating. What kind of place is Cambridge to study? In an 8-week term, people pack in the whole range of experiences: elation and alcohol, camaraderie in the library or on sports fields or at Cindy's. Pinch yourself wonder as you sit in ancient halls, wearing gowns, drinking port. I work with normal universities. No one else is doing that stuff. It is a privilege. And yet that's not everything, is it? Crying in front of your supervisor, that happens. This unbearable sense that you might be an imposter. Serious mental health issues. A pressure to perform that feels unrelenting. Let me share with you one of the best things I ever heard here. It was my DOS telling us what to expect in Freshers Week. And she said, other students, all through your degree, will be like swans, above the surface, calm, unruffled, gliding along beautifully. But below the surface, where you can't see, they're kicking like mad. I think that's one of the wisest things I was ever told. Do you know what she means? The way that people here say, oh, I'm not very good at piano, but they mean I only play to grade 8 standard. The way that everyone loudly proclaims how little work they've done. That fear of being found out in supervisions and seminars that rises within you, perhaps even now as I speak. Look, intellect is a gift. The fact that you are here tells me that you have it in spades. And all through life, you will have seen how intellect opens doors for you. But, and if you haven't learned this yet, you soon will, there are doors it cannot open. On its own, it can't answer ultimate questions. And where does that leave people? Well, I've seen it leave people jaded, depressed, hating the degrees they chose. But the Christian faith promises freedom from that. Because what Jesus offers is freedom from making intellect ultimate. Freedom from making reason supreme and then meeting dead end after dead end as you start asking those ultimate questions. The idea of being a spiritual newborn, born again, is very unappealing to a lot of people, and it was to me because of my pride. But after a couple of terms here, your pride might well take a kicking. And when it does, you might realize what a beautiful, liberating thing Jesus has to offer. More than that, you will soon come to the end of your intellect. That might happen through success. You take that first. You get that prize. And you wake up the next day, and nothing's different. The hunger's still there. You might come to the end of your intellect through tragedy. I really hope this doesn't happen to you. But something might happen to you that happened to me in my third year, and you lose a close friend suddenly, unexpectedly. And when those things happen, you will be asking the kinds of questions that intellect and reason alone cannot answer. Which takes me to the last thing I want to say, a potentially offensive thing. Christian faith is the only place where intellect can thrive. The Christian faith is rational, but it's not rationalistic. And because of that, it can rescue reason. Because it knows how to value intellect without making intellect ultimate. It's the only place where intellect can thrive. Do you see why I said this is potentially offensive? Thanks for not throwing things at me yet. And as that verse on top of the Cavendish shows, the sciences become a thing of pleasure and significance when one believes in God. Not just the sciences, creativity. That too is something that gets enriched when we realize that God loves it and we were made for it. You may not believe in God, but can you see how, for people who do, the whole world evinces the most marvelous creativity, endorsing the human creativity we produce? Or how about intelligent, mature reflection? That too is another thing God loves. And if you study anything in the arts and humanities, that really is what makes your academic discipline shine. And yet, what are we reflecting on? Most of the time, it comes down to human beings, their histories, ideas, thoughts, interactions, legal and financial, their stories, their languages. Human beings are at the heart of the humanities, one way or another. Now, why should the study of human beings matter? You may have a good reason, a good answer, but definitely not as good as the one that the Christian faith has. Christians believe that human beings have an innate significance. The opening scenes of the Bible declare us to be made in God's image. To a believer in this God, of course human beings matter. Of course their histories and ideas and interactions and stories and languages matter. If you've come to this university because you love your degree, because you think it matters, because you value learning, then understand that God agrees with you. God loves Cambridge. He loves the idea of this university, and he can give you better reasons for being here than anyone else can. But I want to go further, so let me ask you a question. Rhetorical at this point. Save your comebacks for the texting later. Why do we trust our reason? Why do we give our intellect a high place? If we really are products of an unguided process of evolution, why should we trust our thinking? Why should we think our thinking correlates with truth, or even that this notion of truth is there at all? Why do we crave and enact justice? Why do we seek and form relationships? Intellect is involved in each one of these things, but for them to be worthwhile, they make an appeal that transcends intellect. To justify, to validate reason and logic, we have to go beyond reason and logic. I find this excerpt from Roger Scruton, a philosopher, really helpful. He writes, "The cosmological path points beyond the edge of the world as science describes it, to a place where another kind of question can be asked, a question that cannot be answered with a cause, but only with a reason. The question, why, asked of the world as a whole. We can answer such a question only by giving a teleological rather than a causal account of things." Belief in God is far from an intellectual cop-out. In fact, I'd contend that belief in God enables us to begin all manner of essential inquiry. At least the believer in God has a reason to trust their reason. The God the Bible presents validates and makes possible a comprehensible world of persons, of cogent epistemology, of justice, of love. And for all that people reject God, each of us lives in that kind of world. We do. We treat it as comprehensible, as if cogent epistemology is possible, as if the persons in it are worthwhile, as if forming loving relationships with them is a good thing, as if injury done to them is unjust. But living in that kind of world, believing it to be that way with no good reason, there's your blind faith. There's your leap into the dark. I'm not saying that those who don't believe in God aren't moral or loving or thinking, obviously not. Many of the most moral and thinking and loving people I know don't currently believe in God. But I am saying that no good objective reason, as far as I can see, is there to hold those things apart from God. That's what feels fairly anti-intellectual to me. Now, everything I've just said may have enraged you. Thanks so much for listening. But as I finish, I want to point you positively to the evidence for this God. I don't want to posit God as some kind of cosmic enabler, the bottom line that makes objectivity possible. Because if I did that, I would just be selling you short. Jesus' claim is that God reveals himself. The ultimate being who is beyond the reach of our intellects reaches down to us. Why? So that we can know him. I said earlier that my move from unbelief to belief was one that came from examining evidence. And the evidence I'd like to point you towards is the undeniable, world-altering impact of Jesus of Nazareth, giving the raw ingredients of 3 years, no money, no armies, haphazard, if not incompetent followers, and a public execution. This man has changed the world forever, altered reality, and defined the kind of culture you inhabit. He claims to offer love, hope, and security to a broken, cynical, fragile world. And he and his early followers were adamant that Jesus offers these things in a more than metaphorical way. And to support that, they pointed to his widely witnessed bodily resurrection from the dead to underline that. That's what Jesus had in mind earlier when he said, "At least believe on the evidence of the works themselves." Let me ask you, what could be less reasonable? What could be more anti-intellectual than not investigating this man and his claims? Than not investigating this man who made your world? And that is something you can do with greater ease than any generation before you. We have a wealth of scholarship, of manuscript study, of textual criticism that puts the historical eyewitness evidence in your hands. Primary sources recording what happened, enabling us to investigate it for ourselves. The biography I've been quoting, it's called John's Gospel, and it's dated to within living memory of the events described. It has widespread manuscript attestation, and it's quoted all over the place in the earliest writings. This is good history. Will you look at it? That's the invitation I'm extending to you. You can find one of these at the back, I think. Go grab one, take it away, and read it. Will you do that? Will you read this with as open a mind as you can muster? Will you see for yourself? Because Jesus' claim, "I am the truth," means that if he's telling the truth, ultimate questions find their answers in him. Lasting satisfaction, hope in the fear of death can be found in him. The things we crave that reason alone can't give are found in him and found fully. Will you be intellectual enough to see for yourself? Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much for that, Niv. There'll now be some time to discuss around tables. Do chat to those around you and keep texting in any questions that you have. Great. Hi. Sorry to break into those conversations, but there'll now be a bit of time for questions from the floor and questions texted in. To start off with, does anyone have any questions from the floor? Great, okay, I think we'll start with one texted in, if that's all right then. So why do you need to believe in God to believe the world is ordered and able to be investigated?
Thanks for asking that. I only spoke for about 20 minutes, so I couldn't really go very deep into these things. I think what I'm trying to say is, of course you can believe in that. Of course you can. What are your reasons for doing so? The same way that you could believe in the tooth fairy. Of course you can do that. Are there good reasons? And I'd want to say that when we push to the end of the argument, believing that the world is ordered, if we really think that we got here by an unguided process of evolution, that really is a huge faith commitment. It's saying all kinds of things about our ability to think rationally, our ability to perceive truth, our ability to extrapolate from sense perception things that are beyond that. And those are all faith commitments. And it's worth knowing that. Now, of course, you can live like that and believe like that. But I think there are problems with that. Firstly, one scientist put it like this. He looks at all of the physics he does and he says, it looks like the universe knew we were coming. I'm an English student. I'm not going to talk to you about the fine-tuning of the universe. That would be ridiculous of me to try. But a lot of people are convinced by the science that they do, even here at Cambridge, that that's the way things are. The fact that we have an ordered universe seems to speak of there being a God. Secondly, as I said towards the end, at this point, I'm not going to try to push you to believe in a God from your belief in an ordered universe. What I'd love more than anything is to invite you to look at this evidence, to see the one that Christians say is at the heart of the order we see around us. Yeah.
Great, thank you. There's a couple on this, so can you explain what you mean by intellect only being able to thrive in a Christian faith? The Greeks, the Romans, Islamic 12th century, also why did religion decline during the Age of Enlightenment?
Great, thank you. I was being really provocative there. I said it was potentially offensive, and I'm glad that people got potentially offended. It's like getting a haircut. You want people to notice that you had a haircut. Thank you. What I don't mean by that is that people who aren't Christians can't be intellectual. What I was trying to say was that for intellect to thrive, for it to mean something, for it to speak to something beyond us, we need to look to a wider framework. And I believe that the Christian faith is that wider framework. I believe it makes sense of all of those things in a way that other things don't. At this point, that is just my belief. So please do keep coming back to big questions and finding out more. But the reason why it's my belief is because of the impact of this man, Jesus of Nazareth, and that's worth knowing about. Secondly, the idea that intellect sort of declines. What was the exact wording of that text?
Can you explain what you mean by intellect only being able to thrive in a Christian faith?
No, the thing about the Age of Enlightenment, that one.
Oh, sorry, that's a different question. If Christianity is the only place where intellect can thrive, why did religion decline during the Age of Enlightenment?
Great question. I don't think that the Age of Enlightenment has killed religion. Why do I say that? Because in the past century, the whole world has become massively more religious. So if you really believe that the Age of Enlightenment killed religion, can I be really, really offensive at this point? I think what you mean is that only among Western people religion is declining, and therefore religion is perhaps invalid. When we go beyond the West, when we look at the other parts of the world, we find religion growing and growing quickly, and we find the Christian faith currently exploding around the world. It looks like, from this point of view, in these British Isles, like that's not happening. But it is happening across the world. So I really would contest that religion's declining. More than that, I think the Age of Enlightenment... Oh, I should probably stop talking because I could go on for ages about this. But what the Age of Enlightenment did was it kind of put all of the burden of finding truth on the individual. It did something atomistic, which I think was actually damaging. I think raises all kinds of questions. So, take the American Declaration of Independence. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, you know that one, that all men are created equal and endowed by that creator with certain inherent unalienable rights. These include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. One of my favourite novelists, Marilyn Robinson, reflects on that, and she says, in what humanist universe is it self-evident? I think the Age of Enlightenment hasn't really been a knockdown moment. It's raised lots of interesting questions, and it certainly doesn't seem to have killed religious faith in any meaningful sense.
Great. Does anyone want to come back on that or ask a different question from the floor? Yes, yeah. Could you wait until the mic comes over? Thank you. Sorry. Thanks.
Is it what? Oh, yes. So just going back on your going back on your Declaration of Independence thing. Going back on your Declaration of Independence thing. Oh, this is fun. So the guy who framed the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, he was a deist, which is a long way from the Christian faith you're proposing now. So much so they themselves argued it was definably different. So how would you say that it needs to be sort of the Christian faith of the kind that you are proposing to allow it to be self-evident?
That is a really good question. And the deistic commitment of the Founding Fathers is really well known. And we in this country tend not to have much beef about that. But I know in America, everyone is always squabbling about what they believed. But it does seem to be deism. Why do I think it has to be Christian belief? Well, again, I'm pushing the boat out here, but I think if you are prepared to posit a deistic God, you owe it to yourself to investigate the most plausible and the most world-changing claim of that God breaking into reality. Don't you? And Jefferson did not have the resources we do to do that. Do you know Jefferson has his Bible? He goes through it, he cuts out the bits he doesn't like, he keeps the bits he does. That's very interesting. But we happen to have stacks of manuscript tradition to work with that he never did. We happen to have so much to burrow into evidence-wise. If Jefferson were alive today, I'd be inviting him, just as I invite all of you, potential future Jeffersons. No, I don't mean that. He was genuinely a genius. Some of you might be. Sorry, I don't know where I'm going there. Sorry, that was very offensive. But the point is, I'd be inviting him too to make that exploration.
Great. Any more questions from the floor? Yes, one over there.
Could you explain what you mean by the ultimate intellect? Do you mean that it's the kind of intellect without empiricism, or?
So I didn't use those words, but I think what I was trying to say was that there are ultimate questions which intellect can't answer. Actually, what you've provided is probably the next step in the argument, that in order for our universe to have ultimate questions, and in order for ultimate answers to exist, there would probably have to be an ultimate intellect out there. A lot of people have described the pursuit of knowledge as thinking God's thoughts after him, which is an interesting way of putting it. I'm not sure I fully understand your question. Do you want to try again? Because I'm not sure I get it.
I mean that you dismissed ultimate rationality in the Christian framework. Yeah? So what do you really mean by that? Because
Great.
I'm not
Good.
sure.
Absolutely. So what I was doing was I was opposing rationalism, in which reason is supreme. I was opposing that to the Christian worldview, in which reason is a person. If you look at the very beginning of this John's Gospel, John uses a Greek word, logos, which at the time was used to refer to reason in the sense you're describing. And he comes out with a shocking claim that this logos is a person. In the beginning was the word, and people reading this from a Greek milieu would have said, yeah, of course. And the word was with God, and they would have thought, oh, okay, yeah, no, they coexist. And then he goes, and the word was God. And later on he describes how this word, this reason, breaks into history, has a face, is a person. Does that make sense? Not a rational standard that exists out on its own. Not a faculty within us that can take us everywhere we want to go, but a person whose very nature authenticates reason at all.
Great, I think that's about all we've got time for. I'm really sorry if you didn't get to answer any of your all your questions. Niv, you can sit down if you like. Niv will hopefully be around at the end. So do come up to the front, do chat to him, do chat to those around you. If you're here today for the first time and just thinking through some of these things, and you'd really love to chat more about it, you'll notice on your tables you have these feedback forms. There's a box saying, I'm interested. If you tick that, leave your name, college, and email. Someone from the Christian Union in your college will be in touch with you over the next couple of days. This is a chance just to meet over a cup of coffee and just chat in a more deeply personal way. You'll also notice at the back of the hall where there's a feedback form box, there will be some books next to it. There's a real variety of books, so do peruse them, as well as the John's Gospels that Niv mentioned in his talk. If you're here today as a guest of the CU, they're completely free, so do just check them out. If any of them take your fancy, grab one on the way out. If you have to rush off now to a lecture, feel free to go, but if not, please do stay and chat. I think there'll be some desserts coming around in a bit. Big Questions will be back here next week, same time, same place. Our very own Dr. Pete Williams from Cambridge will be speaking on Is the New Testament a 4th century fabrication, which should be really good. So do come back for that. Otherwise, have a great day. Thanks for coming.